Well, new developments in the Benghazi attack that killed 4 Americans on 9/11 of this year. We have just learned that the Senate Intelligence Committee will hold hearings on the circumstances surrounding the attack. The closed hearing is set for November 15th. Originally, a bipartisan panel of Democrats and Republicans had demanded more answers from this administration about what happened and why. Additional hearings, we're told, will follow. They will look into the response, the effort to find the terrorists responsible, and whether there is adequate security at other U.S. government facilities in the region. Well, now the father of one of those 4 Americans killed in Benghazi is speaking out, saying that he was moved by the news you heard right here on America Live and Fox News this week about how the White House and top State Department officials and Department of Defense officials knew in real time that our Americans were under attack in Libya. The father of former Navy SEAL Tyrone Woods calling into the Lars Larson radio show, telling a remarkable story about meeting President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton after his son was killed. Tyrone Woods, again, was in Benghazi when the consulate was attacked. He was stationed in an annex about a mile away from the consulate. He responded to calls for help and escaped, only to be found nearly 6 hours later back at the annex, and that is where he was killed by mortar fire. This is the aftermath of that attack. On September 14th, the bodies of Tyrone Woods, U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens, and 2 other Americans were returned home. Their coffins were met at Andrews Air Force Base by the President and the Secretary of State, among others. And that is where we pick up the story of Tyrone Woods' father. He was there as well. And he recounted to Lars meeting the President and the Secretary of State. Here is part of his interview with Lars Larson.
When the president, we had 4 kind of little pod areas there with each one of the families, and when he came over to our little area, you know, I could tell he kind of just mumbled, you know, I'm sorry. His face was looking at me, but his eyes were looking over my shoulder, like he could not look me in the eye. And it was not a sincere, I'm really sorry, you know, that your son died, but it was a totally insincere, more of a whining type, I'm sorry. And it was like just shaking hands with a dead fish. It just didn't feel right. And now it's coming out that apparently the White House Situation Room was watching our people die in real time. This was happening. And I haven't called any of these shows or anything, but when I heard that this morning, this is something I would really like to look into, and I hope that the public does not forget this. Well, this is what Hillary did. She came over and, you know, she did the same thing, you know, separately came over to and talked with me. I gave her a hug, shook her hand, and she did not appear to be one bit sincere at all. And, you know, she mentioned that thing about we're going to have that person arrested and prosecuted that did the video. That was the first time I'd even heard about anything like that. And, you know, apparently even the State Department had live stream and was aware of their calls for help. This is my son. He wasn't even there. He was at a state house about a mile away. He got the distress call. He heard them crying for help. That's why he and Glenn risked their lives to go that extra mile just to take care of the situation. And I'm sure that he wasn't the only one that received that distress call, you know, come save our lives. You know, I'm sure that other people in the military, in the State Department, in the White House, received that same call that he would have received. 6 more days he would have been home. It's not a matter of honoring him or anyone else, and it's not a matter of being mad at anyone either. But just what's coming out right now, kind of the whole feeling that I got about this when it happened is we're not being told the truth. Something fishy is about what happened over there. This just doesn't happen. And now this information coming out about, you know, videos being live streamed, calls for help being sent to the White House station room, whatever that is. It's just, we need to make sure that this does not happen again, so that, you know, people like Ty, who are out there, principled men and women now that are willing to sacrifice their lives, that they won't be abandoned by the commander-in-chief.
Well, Lars Larson joins us now. He, of course, is the host of the Lars Larson radio show and a frequent guest of this program. What an extraordinary interview you conducted there, Lars. You're doing your radio show. He just called in. He wasn't a scheduled guest. He just felt the need to speak out in the wake of the news that broke this week. Tell us more.
Well, I'm based in Portland, Oregon, where my studios are, and there's a connection of Tyrone Woods to this area, and his father just decided to call in, and as you heard him say, he doesn't call talk shows, but excuse me, he was just, it took my breath away when I realized who I was talking to. And of course, we did the back checks to make sure that we really were talking to Charles Woods. But you notice he's not angry about this, but he's more puzzled than anything else. Why would a White House sit there and watch a live video feed, be receiving emails that we now know about 6 weeks later that said this was an organized terrorist attack? And we had air assets an hour away, an hour's flight away in Italy that could have been sent in by the military. And I have a feeling that the military would have been straining at the leash to say, let's go help save our Americans, do what we can do, even if it's late in the game. And nothing was done. And what's really stunning is that, Megyn, you and Fox and conservative talk radio are virtually the only folks in the country who are talking about it. The major networks are spending almost no time on this, on the emails, on the live video feed. We've got the scandal of an American president whose people, I don't know if he personally sat there and watched that video, but his people sat there and watched as this happened and did nothing. Didn't even try to call in, the assets that were available. This, if anything, is that 3 a.m. phone call that Hillary Clinton used to talk about. When you get that call and something bad is happening and you need somebody to make the decision, who's going to make it? Well, the man making the decision, I don't know if he was involved directly or not, or whether they even woke him up, but nothing was done, and our people died.
Lars, I mean, I will say this. General Keane was on the show yesterday, four-star general, former vice chair of the Army, and he said, I'm not going to second-guess the military on something like this. It's not that it doesn't work like it works in the movies. There may have been all sorts of reasons, civilians watching on the ground and so on, that they chose not to do more. But I mean, you can understand the grief of a father, and we haven't really been told. We haven't really been told exactly what went through the minds now, since we've learned that they watched it unfold in real time, in the Situation Room.
Megyn, I don't disagree with you on that, but I'm not second-guessing the military, but I have a feeling this wasn't a military decision. I'll bet this was a political decision. We have a man who's desperate to hang on to the presidency. He wants to win. If he has to throw military assets into Libya, then it makes Libya look like the train wreck that it is.
Well, I mean, maybe prior to the attack, Lars, but I mean, you can't really posit that the President of the United States is going to sit there and watch our people be massacred because, of politics at that moment. I mean, is that what you're suggesting, that he decided not to send in reinforcements at that moment because he said, let him die?
I'm posing the question that I wish the mainstream media was pounding on President Obama as much as they pounded on Bush about the decision to go into Iraq years ago, and saying, was it the right decision? Ask President Obama, were you involved in the decision? Were you asked, should we send help? Were you involved at all? And if you weren't, okay. If this was made at lower levels, fine, but why wasn't the president consulted and asked, we have an embassy under attack, we have assets we can send, should we send them? If he was uninvolved, then I guess the question would be, why wasn't the president notified and involved and asked, what do you want us to do? You're the man who makes the decision. You're where the buck stops.
So far, the White House has declined to comment on that particular piece of the story. They have yet to clear that up one way or the other. I want to ask you about a piece of news that Mr. Woods, Charles Woods, made in his interview with you, Lars, where he said that Hillary Clinton pulled him aside at that ceremony for his son and said, we will have that filmmaker arrested. So, that was the Friday after the Tuesday that the men were killed. And it's the Friday before the Sunday that Condoleezza, Susan Rice was on the talk shows saying that it was all about a video. And now you have Hillary Clinton saying directly to him, we're going to have that filmmaker arrested, even though we know from these cables we saw this week, Lars, that she was told as it was happening, moments after, that this Islamic jihadist group, al-Sharia, was claiming responsibility for it, and she knew that 20 guys with weapons, including RPGs and others weapons, were bombing the consulate and unleashing hell.
Megyn, this is why I think it was a political decision, because It was 13 days later that the filmmaker was arrested. And we know the film had nothing to do with this particular attack on this consulate. So how is it that the State Department is saying, we're going to send the message down, arrest this man, find a pretext? Now, you say, well, he probably did violate his federal parole. Megan, you're a lawyer. I've talked to some people in federal law enforcement who say there are lots of parolees who could be found guilty of violations of their parole.
It was
probation.
It wasn't parole, it was probation.
Right, probation, and sent, and taken into custody. I think this, again, was a political decision. They went after this guy because they wanted to blame the incident on him, even though, as you point out, they knew by that time for a fact that it wasn't the video that did it. But if they took this action, it would divert the media, and it would divert the people on the other side of the planet into believing that the United States was acting against the filmmaker.
It's very interesting to hear from him directly that our Secretary of State specifically was trying to comfort him by saying we were going to have the filmmaker arrested. Yet another tie the administration made between the video and what happened in Benghazi. Lars, thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate it.